Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a book review of the mystery novel Sparkling Cyanide by Agatha Christie. I've been reading a lot of Agatha Christie over the last year and a half. She has quickly become one of my favorite novelists of all time. I started off with Crooked House, which was amazing and is still my favorite novel by her. I then read ABC Murders, a fantastic book. I also read the book Cards on the Table, which was wonderful. I also read Hercule Poirot's Christmas, which was very well done. I read Death on the Nile, which was superb. I read Five Little Pigs, which was fine. And then I read And Then There Were None, which was amazing. And then I read, I had about a 6-month gap where I didn't read any of her books. And then most recently I picked up Halloween Party, which I thought was a fine book. It wasn't amazing, but it was fine. And then I read Sparkling Cyanide. And I was excited to read this in the sense of I was excited for a new Agatha Christie novel. I wasn't particularly excited for this specific book because it didn't have like a hook for me. All the previous books I've read have either been Hercule Poirot mysteries. They've been adaptations of like stage plays like And Then There Were None, or for Crooked House, it was the inspiration for Knives Out, which is my favorite mystery movie. So they had that special kind of hook to each of them that made me interested to read them. This book didn't have that. And so I was a little bit nervous. And there are 3 things that an Agatha Christie novel in particular needs to succeed at. Not all mystery novels have to do this necessarily, but I believe that this is what makes Agatha Christie work. 1, she has to write it in such a way that all of the information in the twist was seeable earlier on. Not necessarily obvious, but the evidence needs to be there. If a character had a motive or a character had something, or if there's a detail, like all the details have to have been carefully placed earlier in the book so that when the twist happens you can say, right, that happened and that happened and that happened. So it's not just like oh, I didn't see that coming, or that makes no sense. Like all the evidence needs to be placed ahead of time. That's the first thing it needs. The second thing it needs is it needs to be memorable. To have a good book, you need to have some reason that you will remember it. It can't just be another, oh, they're all in a house, and someone dies, and then they bring in the constable or the detective, and the detective solves the mystery. You have to have creative background to it. So the ones that I thought were more bland didn't have as much creativeness to it, and the ones that I thought were better had more uniqueness to it, which I thought was really good. And I'll talk about those in a minute. The third thing that an Agatha Christie novel needs is a writing flow that just keeps you reading. This can't be a type of book where you're like, I'll figure out who it is eventually. You have to be, no, I want to find out right now who did the murder because I'm invested in finding out. And so because that, your characters need to be vivid, and your characters need to hook you, not just as reasons that they might have committed the murder. Thankfully, this book does all 3 of them, and does all 3 of them beautifully. I kept in my mind changing who I thought the murderer was as we went through the book. There was one character that I thought, if this character is the murderer, it's too obvious. It is too obvious that it is this person. And this was one of the last people eliminated from the perspective. And so I was like, I'm really worried that they're going to make this character the murderer, and it's going to be a not good Agatha Christie novel. Thankfully, that was not the case. It was not the obvious choice like that. And so when I was reading, I was impressed by the ability that every character had motive. That was basically the premise of the story is, one night at a dinner for a birthday party, a group of people is at this dinner who all know each other, and then the victim ends up accidentally drinking a drink that has cyanide in it, and it kills her instantly. And the whole book is trying to figure out who did it then, and then they try to recreate the scene to try to figure out who did it, to try to put all the pieces together. And of course, chaos ensues. And the way it was written was every character had a motive, and not just a little motive. Every character had a reason that actually made me think, you know what, I could see this person snapping and doing it. I could see this person snapping and doing it. There was no character that was, well, yes, they have a motive, but this character's too nice to want to do it, or this character's too innocent, or something. Every character had motive, means, and opportunity, which is what made it such a great mystery, because you had to really figure out what it was. Then, what I also really liked about the book was it was able to tell a compelling story without having a major personality in it as the detective. For example, Hercule Poirot, massive personality. When he steps onto the page, he just takes over the scenes. And that's why his books are so good. And I haven't read Miss Marple, but I've watched some of the shows with Miss Marple, and she's a very distinct, sweet personality, and having an old woman who's solving your murders is actually quite funny. And so, like, you have big personalities there. This book doesn't exactly have that. You have Colonel Race, who's a character that's been in other novels, but he's not exactly like super memorable. He's not a character that you're like, yes, I remember when you were here, and I remember when you were here, and you have this distinct personality behind him. He has a very bland personality. So Agatha Christie took a risk by not making this a mainstream mystery, by not just throwing in Poirot or Marple, which could have been done, could have made it easier. No, she decides to go this route, and because of that, this makes it more different. And when you do this, you have to do one of two things. Either the mystery has to be so good that you don't need that detective in it, or what it needs to do is the twist needs to be so shocking that you'll never forget it. I think that Crooked House does both of these perfectly. Crooked House also does not have Miss Marple or Hercule Poirot or anyone, yet the twist is so shocking that you will remember it, and the story was so compelling that it just works so well. It's still my favorite Agatha Christie novel, and I think this is very similar, not in terms of plot beats, but in the way that it reads as a non-personality-based book, as just a murder mystery. And so I think this is up there with Crooked House because it worked so well. The murder mystery is much more shocking in Crooked House, but it still works here because it was very well laid out. This is one of the few times where when all the evidence was laid out at the end and all the tiny details, because this book has a lot of tiny details that are blink and you miss them details, but I could remember reading each of those details when I had read the earlier portions of the book, so it made sense to me that the murder mystery occurred as it did. Yes, it was still a surprise, but I could see every piece of evidence laid out, just perfectly laid out, that I was like, that makes sense, you've earned your murder mystery here. And so I was very pleased with the way the murder mystery happened. Also, similar to Crooked House, Crooked House, the main character is not a detective, but he wants to marry this girl. But the only way that this girl will agree to marry him is if he solves the murder of her grandfather. And so the whole story, you have that incentive that he has to solve the murder to be with this girl. So you have that kind of romantic element to it that makes you want to cheer for them. This book has two characters that are, well, there's several romantic, quote-unquote, romantic plot lines, but there's two in particular that you feel have a similar place that once they solve the murder, they can be together. And the problem is both of them were potential suspects, and so you don't root for them as hard as you would root for the Crooked House couple, because you know the male in Crooked House has absolutely no way of having been involved in the murder because he was not even on the same continent when it happened. Whereas here, either one of the couple could have done it. Doesn't mean they did or didn't, but either one of them could have, so it doesn't make you root for them in the same way. You're still kind of hoping that neither one of them did it so they can end up together because you're a hopeless romantic like myself. Or maybe you're not. But if you're a hopeless romantic, you kind of want them not to be it, but there's no guarantee like there was in Crooked House. But it's still there. So those were elements that made it similar to Crooked House that made me think, yeah, that's interesting. That's what makes it really compelling. And then also, it flew by as a mystery. each, like, it was split up, the book is split up into 3 portions. The first portion is basically recounting all of the characters, how their perspective on the death at the beginning of the book, and also how their lives unfold over the next 6 months to a year. And then the middle portion is the setting up of the recreation of the murder. And the final portion, which is the longest portion, is the solving the murder. And each part was so brilliantly laid out that really, if you are dedicated, you could like read all of part 1, which was about 80 pages, take a break, go do something for a couple hours, come back, read part 2, which is about another 60 pages, take a break, go do something for a couple hours, come back, and read part 3. Now, part 3 is the longest, it's like 120 pages. But part 3 blows through because of just the revealing evidence and trying to find out, because you're so invested in finding out the answers. So I, as you can tell, I'm gushing about this book because it was so good. It put my faith back in Agatha Christie, because Halloween Party was a good book, and it was a fun mystery, but it didn't have the it factor that the other books that I love had. And also, what made it special was some of the themes it explored, but as a murder mystery, it didn't hook me in the proper way. This book did, and this book was just the perfect storm to happen for me. And I think that the original title of Remembered Death they could have kept it as that. Sparkling Cyanide pops as a title, and this cover pops. Looks very good. This is a perfect cover for this book. And Sparkling Cyanide is going to get people in bookstores to want to look at the book. So I understand why they changed it. But Remembered Death was also a superb title. When you read the book, you understand why it's Remembered Death. So I loved this book. It is a top 3. I will say it's, as of right now, I may change it later, but it's currently my number 3 favorite Agatha Christie novel. I still love Crooked House is my all-time favorite. Like, it'll be really tough to unseat it. And I think And Then There Were None is a better novel. Not necessarily more enjoyable for me, and actually it's a tough novel to read, but I think that's a better book. And then I would say this is number 3 for me, and then I would put ABC Murders and Death on the Nile as like a really close number 4. They're right underneath this, but this is my number 3 as of right now. So I loved the book. I'll give it a 9.5. I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. So that's my review of Sparkling Cyanide. If you've read this book, what did you think of that twist? Make sure you put that if you're going to spoil it, make sure you actually let people know so that they don't just come across a spoiler. But let me know your thoughts on it. Did you see it coming? Did you not? And what did you think of that romance? Did you want those 2 characters to end up together or not? And there's actually, as I mentioned, there's actually like 3 or 4 different couples that could have ended together, but I'm talking about one in particular. That I really wanted to end up together. Anyway, that is my review of Sparkling Cyanide. Please subscribe to my channel for more Agatha Christie and other book reviews. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.